there's a feeling you might recognize. Not sharp, not obvious, not something that announces itself loudly or demands immediate attention. Just ... a presence, a weight, a sense that something is quietly following you through your life. No matter how much changes on the surface, no matter how many new chapters you begin, no matter how many times you move forward, start fresh, or try again, something underneath stays the same. Something beneath all the visible progress remains unchanged, and you can feel it. Even if you can't name it, even if you've never said it out loud, it's there, persistent, patient, traveling with you from one year to the next, from one version of your life to another. You change jobs, it follows. You change relationships, it remains. You change locations, goals, habits, identities, and still, it's there, not blocking you exactly, not stopping you from moving forward or achieving things or building a life that looks functional from the outside, but present, quietly present, like a shadow you can't quite shake, like a weight you've learned to carry so skillfully that you almost forget it's there, until you pause, until you slow down, until you have a quiet moment where nothing is demanding your attention. Then you feel it, that subtle, persistent sense that something is being carried forward, something that doesn't belong to your current circumstances or your recent choices, something older, something deeper, something that's been with you longer than you realized. And here's what makes this so disorienting. It doesn't feel like a problem. It doesn't present itself as something broken or wrong or in need of fixing. It just feels ... normal, familiar, like part of the architecture of who you are. You might not even think about it most days. You're busy, you're moving, you're functioning, you're handling your life. But in those quiet moments when you're driving alone, or lying awake at night, or standing in the shower, you feel it. That presence, that weight, that sense that something is quietly following you no matter where you go or what you change, and you wonder, will this ever leave? Will there ever be a moment when I don't feel this anymore? When I've finally moved far enough forward that it doesn't follow me? Or is this just ... part of life? Part of being human? Part of what everyone carries but no one talks about? Most people assume the latter. They assume this quiet weight is just normal, just reality, just the way things are. So they stop questioning it. They stop noticing it. They learn to live with it so smoothly that it becomes invisible, and they carry it forward year after year, chapter after chapter, version after version, into new jobs, into new relationships, into new goals and new identities and new attempts at starting fresh. And the weight comes with them, unchanged, unexamined, unaddressed, because no one told them it could be different. No one showed them that this thing they're carrying, this subtle, persistent, invisible presence, isn't permanent. It's not part of their personality. It's not just how life feels. It's not something they have to accept as unchangable. It's a block, a quiet, invisible, deeply embedded block that most people carry into every new phase of their life without realizing it. And 2026 won't erase it. Time alone won't dissolve it. A new year won't make it disappear. Because this block doesn't respond to time. It doesn't respond to change. It doesn't respond to hoping things will be different. It only responds to recognition, to awareness, to finally seeing it for what it is. And once you see it once, you recognize what you've been carrying. Everything changes. Not because you fixed it, but because you stopped carrying it unconsciously. You probably believed at some point that time would change you, that if you just made it to the next year, the next phase, the next version of your life, things would feel different. That the weight you're carrying would naturally lighten, that the patterns you're repeating would naturally break, that the version of yourself you've been trying to escape would naturally dissolve. Next year, you tell yourself, next year will be different, and you believe it, because that's what we're taught. That time heals, that fresh starts work, that the simple act of moving forward creates transformation, so you cross into the new year with hope, with intention, with the belief that this time, something will shift. And for a while it feels true. New routines, new goals, new energy, new possibilities. But then weeks in, you start to notice the same feelings returning, the same patterns emerging, the same internal experience showing up in different external circumstances, different job, same frustration, different relationship, same dynamic, different goal, same resistance. And you wonder, how is this still here? I changed everything. I moved forward. I left that behind. But you didn't. Not really, because while your circumstances changed, while your life moved forward, while time passed and calendars turned, something underneath remained unchanged. Not your memories, not your past experiences, not the events that happened to you. Something deeper, something structural, something that operates beneath the level of conscious awareness, an internal operating system that doesn't update just because the calendar does, a pattern that doesn't dissolve just because you want it to. A block that doesn't release just because time passes. And this is what most people don't understand. Time alone doesn't change you. Time moves you forward. Time gives you new experiences. Time creates distance from past events. But time doesn't transform your internal structure. It doesn't recalibrate your operating system. It doesn't dissolve the blocks you're carrying at a deeper level. You can move through 10 new years and still be operating from the same internal framework you had at the beginning. Different circumstances, different relationships, different goals, but the same you underneath it all, the same patterns, the same blocks, the same weight. This is why next year will be different so rarely comes true. Not because you're not trying, not because you're not changing things externally, but because the change you're hoping for isn't something time creates, it's something awareness creates. And without awareness, without recognizing what you're actually carrying, you just transport the same internal structure into new external circumstances. New year, same block, new life, same weight, new version of yourself, same unresolved foundation. And the cycle continues, year after year, fresh start after fresh start, hoping that time will do what only recognition can do. Because here's the truth. You don't leave blocks behind by moving forward in time, you leave them behind by seeing them clearly, and most people never see them. Because the blocks they're carrying don't feel like blocks, they feel normal, they feel like personality. They feel like just how I am. And so they carry them forward, unconsciously, automatically, into every new year, into every new phase, into every new attempt at starting fresh, including 2026, because 2026 won't erase what you're carrying any more than 2025 did, or 2024, or any year before that. Time doesn't dissolve blocks. Awareness does, and until you see what you're carrying, until you recognize the weight that's been following you, it will keep traveling with you no matter how much time passes, no matter how many fresh starts you make, no matter how different your life looks on the surface. The block comes with you, quietly, invisibly, unchanged, unless you finally see it. When most people think about inner blocks, they imagine something obvious, a wall, a barrier, a resistance so strong you can feel it pushing back against you. They expect blocks to hurt, to create friction, to show up as breakdowns or crises or moments where everything falls apart. They think, if I had a real block, I'd know it, I'd feel it. It would be impossible to miss. But that's not how the most powerful blocks work. Because the blocks that actually shape your life, the ones that travel with you year after year, the ones that determine your patterns and limit your possibilities, those blocks don't feel like resistance. They feel like normalcy. They don't hurt. They don't create obvious pain. They don't announce themselves with dramatic breakdowns or sudden crises. They just exist, quietly, seamlessly, integrated into the fabric of your everyday experience. Think about the difference between a block that screams and a block that whispers. A block that screams gets your attention. It creates pain, friction, breakdown. It forces you to stop, to look, to address it. You can't ignore a screaming block, so you deal with it. You'll work through it. You'll heal it, or release it, or find some way to move past it. But the block that whispers, the block that feels normal, the block that's so smoothly integrated into your life that it doesn't create any obvious pain, that block gets carried for years, for decades, because there's no signal telling you it's there, no breakdown forcing you to look at it, no crisis demanding you address it, no pain making it impossible to ignore, just a quiet, persistent pattern that feels like this is just how I am. And this is the danger of unconscious carryover. The blocks you can feel, you eventually address. The blocks you can see, you eventually work through. But the blocks that feel normal, the blocks that have become so familiar they're invisible, the blocks that don't hurt enough to demand attention, those are the ones that travel with you. From one year to the next. From one version of your life to another. Because they don't feel like blocks, they feel like personality, like preferences, like just the way things are. You don't question them, you don't examine them, you don't even notice them most of the time. You just live with them, adapt around them, build your life in ways that accommodate them, and over time, they become so integrated into your identity that you can't separate you from the block anymore. Your limitations feel like your nature, your patterns feel like your character, your blocks feel like your personality, and so you carry them forward, not consciously, not intentionally, but automatically, because how do you release something you don't even know you're carrying? How do you address something that doesn't feel like a problem? How do you heal something that's disguised as normal? You don't. You just carry it, year after year. Fresh start after fresh start. Into new relationships that somehow recreate the same dynamic. Into new jobs that somehow trigger the same frustration. Into new goals that somehow hit the same invisible ceiling. And you wonder, why does this keep happening? Why do I keep ending up here? But it's not bad luck. It's not coincidence. It's not that you're choosing the wrong things, it's that you're carrying the same block into every new choice. And the block shapes what you see, what you choose, what you create, not through resistance, but through normalcy, not through pain, but through quiet, invisible continuity. And the most dangerous part, this block doesn't just affect one area of your life. It doesn't just show up in relationships, or just in work, or just in one specific pattern. It's structural, foundational, and it quietly shapes everything because it's not just a block. It's a block that's embedded itself into who you think you are, and that's what we're going to explore next. Here's where it gets deeper, because this block you're carrying, this quiet, invisible weight that travels with you, hasn't just followed you through your life. It's become part of how you describe yourself. It's embedded itself into your identity, into your personality, into the story you tell about who you are. You don't experience it as a block anymore. You experience it as ... You am just someone who ... I've always been the type of person who ... That's just not how I am. These phrases, these explanations for why you are the way you are, they're not describing your authentic nature. They're describing the patterns you've built around the block, but you can't see the difference anymore. Because the block has disguised itself so skillfully, so seamlessly, that it feels like personality. Think about it. What if the traits you think define you, your preferences, your tendencies, your characteristics aren't actually you? What if they're adaptations, compensations, patterns you developed in response to something unresolved? I'm introverted. Or are you avoiding the vulnerability of being truly seen? I'm independent. Or ... Are you protecting yourself from the risk of depending on someone who might leave? I'm careful. Or have you built an entire identity around not taking risks because taking risks once hurt you on private? Or are you hiding because being visible once felt dangerous? I'm not saying these aren't real parts of you. I'm asking, what came first? Did you choose these traits? Or did you develop them as a way to navigate around something that felt unsafe, uncertain, or unresolved? Because here's what happens when a block embeds itself into identity. You stop questioning it. You stop seeing it as something separate from you. You stop wondering if it could be different. It becomes just who you are, a fixed truth, an unchangeable fact. And once it reaches that level of integration, once it's woven into the fabric of your self-concept, it's almost impossible to release, because releasing it would feel like losing yourself, like dismantling your personality, like becoming someone you don't recognize. So you keep it, you protect it, you defend it, not because it serves you, but because it feels like you. And this is why the block survives year after year, why it travels with you into every new phase, why time alone doesn't dissolve it, because you're not carrying it as a burden anymore. You're carrying it as an identity, and we don't let go of identities easily, even when they limit us, even when they exhaust us, even when they keep us from becoming who we actually are, because the familiar feels safer than the unknown. The known limitation feels more manageable than the uncertain possibility. So the block stays, disguised as personality, protected by familiarity, maintained by the belief that this is just who I am. And you build your entire life around it. You choose relationships that accommodate it. You pursue goals that don't threaten it. You create a reality that allows you to stay inside the boundaries it's created, not consciously, not deliberately, but automatically. Because when your identity is built around a block, your choices naturally reinforce it. You're not trying to stay limited. You're trying to stay recognizable to yourself. And that's the hidden cost no one talks about. You're living as the adapted version of yourself, the compensated version, the version that developed in response to something unresolved, not the authentic, not the version that would exist if the block had never formed. And the exhaustion you feel, the sense that something is always slightly off, the persistent feeling that you're not fully yourself, that's the cost of maintaining the disguise, of living as a personality built around a block instead of an identity built on authentic ground. And here's what most people don't realize. 2026 won't change this. A new year won't dissolve a block that's become your identity. A fresh start won't release a pattern you're protecting as who you are. In fact, 2026 will do the opposite. It will amplify it, mirror it, reflect it back to you in ways you can't ignore, because the future doesn't erase what's unresolved. It magnifies it. And if you cross into 2026 still believing that this block is your personality, still protecting it, defending it, living around it ... you'll just carry it forward into new circumstances, new opportunities, new versions of your life, and it will shape everything, quietly, invisibly, just like it always has, unless you finally see it for what it is, not your personality, your adaptation. And adaptations can be released. You're probably hoping that 2026 will be different, that when the calendar turns, when you cross into that new year, something will automatically shift, that the weight you've been carrying will somehow feel lighter, that the patterns you've been repeating will somehow break, that the block disguised as your personality will somehow ... release. 2026 will be my year. You tell yourself it's the same thing you said about 2025 and 2024 and the years before that, because we're wired to project hope onto the future, to believe that some external shift, a new year, a new phase, create the internal change we've been waiting for. But here's what most people don't understand. 2026 isn't a reset, it's a mirror. It's not going to erase what you're carrying. It's not going to wipe the slate clean. It's not going to give you a fresh start independent of who you are right now. It's going to reflect back to you with increasing clarity exactly what you've been carrying all along. Because 2026 isn't just another year. It's a convergence point, a moment where timelines compress, where unresolved patterns become impossible to ignore, where what's been operating invisibly in the background moves to the foreground. And if you cross into 2026 still carrying this block, still living as the adapted version of yourself, still protecting patterns disguised as personality, it won't disappear, it will amplify. Think about what happens when you bring the same internal structure into a new external context. You get a new job, but you experience the same frustration. You enter a new relationship, but you recreate the same dynamic. You set a new goal, but you hit the same invisible ceiling. The circumstances change, the environment changes, but your internal operating system, your unconscious patterns, your embedded blocks you stay the same. And 2026 will provide new circumstances, new opportunities, new contexts. But if your internal structure hasn't changed, those new circumstances will just become new stages for the same patterns to play out. New year, same block. New possibilities, same limitations. New contexts, same outcomes. Because the future doesn't erase the unresolved. It magnifies it. It gives you more sophisticated environments to notice what's still operating beneath the surface. More complex situations to reveal what you haven't addressed. More visible consequences to what you've been carrying unconsciously. This is why 2026 becomes a mirror, not a reset. It doesn't give you a clean slate. It shows you what's written on the slate you're already carrying. And here's the part that makes this both challenging and clarifying. This isn't punishment. It's not the universe testing you or making things harder. It's not evidence that you're failing or that you'll never change. It's just how time works when something is unresolved. The future doesn't heal what the present hasn't acknowledged. It doesn't dissolve what awareness hasn't touched. It doesn't transform what recognition hasn't reached. It just continues. And in continuing, it reveals. So when you cross into 2026 with the same block you've been carrying, the same invisible weight, the same patterns disguised as personality, the same adaptations you've been protecting, you won't get a fresh start. You'll get a clearer view of how the block shapes your choices, of how it limits your possibilities, of how it creates the same outcomes in different packaging. And that clarity, that unavoidable reflection, is actually the gift, because you can't release what you can't see. You can't transform what you haven't recognized. You can't heal what you're still calling personality. So 2026 won't reset you, but it will show you what needs to be seen. It will mirror back the patterns you've been carrying, the blocks you've been protecting, the adaptations you've been living inside of, not to punish you, but to give you the opportunity to finally see them clearly. And once you see them, once the mirror reflects back what's actually there, you have a choice. You can keep carrying them, keep protecting them, keep believing they are just who you are, or you can recognize them for what they actually are, not your personality, your adaptation, not your nature, your response to something unresolved. And adaptations, once seen clearly, can be released, but only if you see them before you cross the threshold. Because after 2026 begins, the patterns won't just be invisible anymore, they'll be undeniable. You might have noticed something strange, that no matter which area of your life you try to change, relationships, goals, ambitions, the same feeling shows up, different contexts, same pattern, different environment, the same outcome. You leave a job because it felt limiting, and the new job feels the same way within months. You end a relationship because of a specific dynamic, and the next relationship recreates it. You set a new goal with fresh determination, and you hit the same invisible wall, and you wonder, am I just choosing wrong? Am I attracting the same things? Am I cursed? But it's not about choice. It's not about attraction. It's not about luck or fate, or cosmic punishment. It's about transfer. The block you're carrying doesn't stay in one area of your life. It doesn't limit you only at work, or only in relationships, or only in specific contexts. It's structural, foundational, and it operates across everything. Because the block isn't about the job or the person or the goal. It's about the internal framework you bring to each of those things. Think about it like this. If you're carrying a specific limitation in how you relate to yourself, to possibility, to risk, to being seen, that limitation doesn't change just because the environment changes. New job, same limitation, different relationship, same pattern, fresh goal, same block. Because you're not entering these new situations as a blank slate. You're entering them with the same internal operating system, the same unconscious patterns, the Same adapted identity, that system, that structure shapes how you show up, what you choose, how you respond, what you allow, what you avoid. So you might leave a job where you felt undervalued, and then unconsciously recreate situations in a new job where you feel undervalued again, not because you chose to, but because the pattern of not valuing yourself is operating beneath your conscious choices. You might end a relationship where vulnerability felt dangerous, and then find yourself in a new relationship where you're still keeping walls up, still protecting yourself, still unable to fully let someone in, not because you picked the same type of person, but because the block around vulnerability travels with you. You might set a new goal with complete commitment, and then find yourself self-sabotaging in the exact same way you did with the last goal, not because you're not disciplined, but because the pattern of stopping yourself just before success is embedded in your internal structure. This is the exhausting part, the part that makes people feel hopeless, because you try so hard to change things externally. You change jobs, you change relationships, you change goals, you change cities, friend groups, routines, habits, and still the same feeling follows. The same pattern emerges. The same limitation reveals itself. And after enough attempts, you start to believe, maybe this is just how it is. Maybe this is just who I am. Maybe I'm destined to experience the same thing no matter what I do. But it's not destiny. It's transfer. The block you haven't recognized. The pattern you haven't seen. The adaptation you've been calling personality. It's transferring across every area of your life. Not because you're broken. Not because you're cursed. But because it's operating at a level deeper than your conscious choices. It's in your nervous system, your identity, your unconscious framework, and until you see it at that level, until you recognize the structure beneath the patterns changing your external circumstances won't change your internal experience. New job, same structure, new relationship, same block, new goal, same limitation, because the problem isn't what you're choosing. The problem is what you're carrying into every choice, and that's the hidden mechanism most people never see. They keep changing environments, thinking the environment is the problem, but the environment isn't creating the pattern. You're bringing the pattern into every environment, and the pattern, that quiet, invisible, deeply embedded block, is what's creating the same outcomes in different packaging. This is why 2026 won't automatically change anything, because you're going to bring the same internal structure into that new year, new opportunities, new contexts. But if the block is still there, if the pattern is still operating, if the adapted identity is still running the show, the outcomes will be the same, just in new environments, and the exhaustion of that, the depletion of trying so hard externally while nothing shifts internally, that's the cost no one talks about, until now. Here's what most people don't realize about carrying a block unconsciously. It's not just that it limits you, it's not just that it creates patterns or shapes outcomes, it depletes you, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that shows up on the surface, or announces itself clearly, but in a quiet, persistent, low-grade way that most people never name, because they're too busy functioning to notice they're exhausted. You look fine from the outside, you're handling your life, you're showing up, you're getting things done. But inside, there's a constant drain, a subtle, persistent fatigue that has nothing to do with how much you've slept or how busy your schedule is. It's the fatigue of living as someone you're not, of maintaining an adapted identity, of carrying a weight you can't name while pretending it isn't there. You might feel it as emotional flattening, where things that used to move you don't anymore, where joy feels muted, where nothing lands quite as deeply as it should. Not depression, exactly, not breakdown, just ... a quiet absence of feeling, a distance between you and your own experience. Or you might feel it as a sense of never arriving, of always working towards something but never actually getting there, of moving forward without progressing, of trying without landing, like you're on a treadmill, going through the motions, expending energy, but never actually reaching the place where you can finally rest and say, I made it, because you can't arrive at a destination when you're carrying a block that keeps you perpetually adapting, adjusting, compensating. You can't fully land in your life when part of you is always managing, controlling, protecting the patterns you've built around something unresolved. And here's the cost no one talks about. Living this way takes energy. Constant, invisible energy, energy to maintain the adapted identity, energy to keep the block disguised as personality, energy to function well externally while feeling depleted internally. You're not just living your life, you're performing it, keeping up the appearance of being fine while something underneath drains you quietly, steadily, without pause. And most people don't realize this is happening because the depletion is so gradual, so consistent, that it becomes normal. They think, this is just how life feels. This is just what adulthood is. This low-grade exhaustion, this emotional flattening, this sense of never quite arriving, that's just reality. But it's not. It's the cost of carrying an unconscious block. the cost of living as an adapted version of yourself instead of your actual self, the cost of maintaining patterns you've never examined, the cost of protecting limitations you've mistaken for personality. And the exhaustion isn't just physical or emotional, it's existential. It's the exhaustion of living at a distance from yourself, of always being slightly removed from your own experience, of never fully inhabiting your life because part of you is always managing the block. You're here, but you're not fully here. You're present, but you're not fully present. You're alive, but you're not fully alive. Because living unconsciously with a block creates a barrier between you and your experience, between you and other people, between you and the possibility of actually arriving somewhere. In that barrier, that invisible wall costs you more than you realize. It costs you depth. It costs you connection. It costs you the ability to fully feel, fully land, fully be. And it costs you time, years, decades, spent functioning well on the surface while depleting internally, spent trying to arrive at places you can never actually reach because the block keeps you in perpetual motion without destination. This is the real cost, not just limitation, not just pattern repetition, but the gradual erosion of your vitality, your aliveness, your capacity to fully experience your own life. And most people carry this cost all the way into 2026 and beyond, because they never realize they're carrying it. They just think this is how life feels. This is what normal is. But it's not normal. It's depletion. And depletion, once recognized, can finally be addressed. But only if you see it. Only if you stop calling it just how life is and start recognizing it for what it actually is. The cost of living unconsciously with a block you've been carrying far too long. But here's what changes everything. Not action. Not effort. Not a technique you practice or a strategy you implement. Awareness. A single moment of clear recognition that interrupts the entire pattern. Because the block you're carrying, the one disguised as personality, the one transferring across your entire life, the one depleting you quietly, it survives on one thing. Invisibility. It needs you to not see it. It needs you to believe it's just who you are. It needs you to keep carrying it unconsciously, automatically, without question. And the moment you see it, clearly the moment awareness lands, everything shifts. Not because you fixed it, not because you healed it, not because you did something to release it, but because you stopped carrying it. Unconsciously think about the difference between unconscious continuation and conscious observation. When you're carrying a block unconsciously, it operates automatically. It shapes your choices without your awareness. It creates patterns you don't see. It limits you in ways you can't track. You're not choosing the limitation, you're just living inside it, adapting to it, building your entire life around it, without realizing that's what you're doing. But the moment you become aware, the moment you see the pattern clearly, recognize the adaptation for what it is, notice the block operating beneath your choices, the automaticity breaks. Subtly, what was invisible becomes visible. What was unconscious becomes conscious. What was just who you are becomes something I've been carrying, and that shift from unconscious to conscious, from invisible to visibilize, what interrupts the carryover. Because you can't unconsciously carry something you're consciously aware of. You can't automatically repeat a pattern you're actively observing. You can't blindly protect an adaptation you've recognized as an adaptation. The awareness itself is the interruption, not because it forces change, not because it creates immediate transformation, but because it breaks the spell of invisibility that allowed the block to operate unopposed. And here's what happens when you see it clearly. The block doesn't disappear instantly. The pattern doesn't vanish overnight. The adapted identity doesn't dissolve in a single moment. But the grip loosens. The automaticity weakens. The sense that this is just who I am starts to crack. You start to notice, oh, that's the pattern again. That's the block operating. That's not me, that's the adaptation I've built around something unresolved. And with that recognition comes space, distance, choice. What used to happen automatically now happens consciously. What used to feel inevitable now feels optional. What used to run unopposed now runs under observation. And observation changes everything. Because when you're watching a pattern operate, you're no longer fully inside it. When you're recognizing an adaptation, you're no longer completely identified with it. When you're seeing a block clearly, you're no longer unconsciously controlled by it. You still might engage with it. You still might choose the familiar pattern. But now it's a choice, not an automaticity. Now it's conscious, not unconscious. Now it's visible, not invisible. And that visibility, that awareness, that recognition is what allows something new to emerge. Not through force, not through trying, not through battling the block or fixing yourself or becoming someone different, just through seeing, clearly, consistently, without judgment. Because the block doesn't need to be fought. It just needs to be seen. And once it's seen, once awareness has interrupted the unconscious carryover, it can't operate the same way anymore. It might still be there. It might still show up, but it's no longer invisible. It's no longer automatic. It's no longer disguised as personality. It's just a pattern. an adaptation, something you've been carrying, something that, once seen clearly, starts to release. On its own, not because you made it release, but because awareness created the space for release to happen naturally. This is the turning point. The moment everything shifts, not through action, but through recognition. And here's what most people misunderstand. This isn't letting go in the way it's usually taught. It's not forcing yourself to release something. It's not affirming your way out of a pattern. It's not visualizing freedom or manifesting change. It's quieter than that, simpler than that, more natural than that. It's just ... seeing, and letting the seeing do the work. Because awareness doesn't just show you the block, it weakens it, it interrupts it, it creates the conditions for it to finally dissolve. Not because you're trying to dissolve it, but because once something is seen clearly, it can't stay hidden anymore, and what can't stay hidden ... can't stay carried unconsciously into 2026. Now let's talk about what most people get wrong about letting go. Because the moment you realize you're carrying a block, the immediate instinct is to try to release it, to get rid of it, to force it out of your system as quickly as possible. Just let it go, people say. As if it's that simple. As if you can decide to release something and have it disappear on command. So you try, you affirm your way out of it. You visualize freedom from it. You declare that you're done with this pattern. And attempt to will yourself into a new way of being. You might even do the work. Therapy, journaling, healing modalities, inner work. And sometimes it feels like progress. You feel lighter for a moment. You think, finally, I released it. But then weeks later, months later, the same pattern shows up again. The same limitation reappears. The same block resurfaces. And you realize you didn't actually let it go. You just performed letting go. You declared freedom without creating the internal shift that makes freedom real. Because here's what most people don't understand. Real letting go doesn't happen through force. You can't muscle your way out of an unconscious pattern. You can't willpower your way past a block that's embedded in your identity. You can't think your way into release. Real letting go isn't something you do, it's something that happens when the conditions are right. And the condition that makes it right is awareness, not effort, not declaration, not performance. Just seeing. Clearly, consistently, without trying to change what you see. Because when you try to force release, when you push yourself to just let it go, you create resistance. You add effort on top of effort. You make the block tighter by fighting it. But when you simply see it, when you observe it without trying to change it, when you recognize it without battling it, that's when something shifts. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but genuinely. Real letting go is quiet. It's gradual. It's almost invisible until it's complete. It doesn't feel like a breakthrough moment. It feels like ... a slow softening, a gentle loosening, a natural distance that grows between you and the pattern. One day you notice, oh, that thing that used to trigger me doesn't anymore. Or, I responded differently this time, without forcing myself to. Or, the pattern showed up, but I didn't engage with it the same way. I just ... observed it and it passed. That's real letting go, not a declaration, not a performance, not a forced release, just a natural dissolution that happens when you stop carrying something unconsciously. And here's what makes this different from all the surface level letting go advice. It's structural, not superficial. You're not just changing your thoughts about the block. You're not just reframing your relationship to it. You're not just managing it better. You're allowing the internal structure that created the block to reorganize itself, to recalibrate, to release its grip from the inside out. And that process is slower than people want, quieter than people expect, less dramatic than people hope, but it's permanent, because it's real. Forced release creates temporary relief followed by repetition. Real letting go creates lasting shift. Forced release is loud. Real letting go is quiet. Forced release requires constant effort. Real letting go requires consistent awareness. And the beautiful part, you don't have to get it perfect. You don't have to do it right. You don't have to perform freedom or prove you've released it. You just have to see it and keep seeing it. Without judgment, without force, without trying to make something happen. Because letting go isn't an action you take. It's a natural result of awareness sustained long enough for the pattern to dissolve on its own. It's not something you do. It's something that happens through you when you finally stop trying to make it happen. And that distinction between doing and allowing, between forcing and observing, between performance and genuine shifty is what determines whether you carry the block into 2026 ... or whether you finally leave it behind. So here we are. You now see what most people carry into every new year without realizing. A block. Quiet. Invisible. Embedded so deeply into identity that it feels like personality. Operating so automatically that it shapes every choice, every pattern, every outcome. Transferring across jobs, relationships, goals, ambitions, creating the same internal experience in different external circumstances, depleting you quietly while you function well on the surface, and you see it now, not as a vague feeling anymore, but as a structure, a pattern, an adaptation you've been carrying far longer than you realized. And that seeing that awareness changes everything, not because it instantly dissolves the block, not because it guarantees a different future, but because it interrupts the unconscious carryover that would have continued indefinitely without recognition. Now you have a choice most people never get because they never see the block clearly enough to choose. You can cross into 2026 the way you've crossed into every other year, carrying the same weight, operating from the same internal structure, hoping that time alone will create the shift you're waiting for. And if you do, 2026 will become what it becomes for everyone carrying unconscious blocks, a mirror, reflecting back the patterns you haven't seen, amplifying the limitations I haven't recognized, showing you more clearly than ever what you're still carrying. You can cross into 2026 with awareness, not perfectly, not completely healed, not fully transformed, but awake, observing, seeing the pattern when it operates, recognizing the block when it shows up, no longer carrying it unconsciously. And if you do that, if you cross with awareness, instead of automaticity, 2026 becomes something different, not because the year itself is magical, not because time suddenly works differently, but because you're different. Your internal structure is reorganizing. Your relationship to the pattern is shifting. Your capacity to respond instead of react is growing. You still might engage with the old pattern sometimes. You still might feel the weight occasionally, but now it's conscious. Now it's visible. Now it's optional. And that changes everything, because when you cross into a new year carrying awareness instead of unconsciousness, the future stops being a repetition of the past. New circumstances become new possibilities instead of new stages for old patterns. New opportunities become openings, mist of triggers. New contexts become spaces to respond differently instead of environments that recreate the same dynamic. You don't get guarantees. You don't get promises of specific outcomes. You don't get a roadmap of exactly how things will unfold, but you, which gets something more valuable. Internal ground, clarity, the capacity to see what's actually happening instead of being unconsciously controlled by it. And from that ground, everything shifts, not dramatically, not all at once, but genuinely, permanently. So as 2026 approaches, you have this choice: carry the block unconsciously and let the future mirror back what you haven't seen, or carry awareness and let the future become the space where what you've seen finally dissolves. Most people won't make this choice because they won't see it clearly enough to choose. They'll cross into 2026 the same way they crossed into this year, and the year before, and the year before that, carrying the same weight, repeating the same patterns, hoping for different results without changing the internal structure that creates the outcomes. But you're not most people anymore. You see what they don't see. You recognize what they don't recognize. You've become aware of what most people carry their entire lives without ever noticing. And that awareness, that seeing, is already working, already interrupting, already creating the conditions for the block to dissolve naturally. You don't have to force it. You don't have to perform freedom. You don't have to prove you released it. You just have to keep seeing it, keep observing it, keep recognizing it when it shows up, and let the seeing do the work. Because awareness sustained long enough doesn't just show you the block, it releases you from it. Not because you made it happen, but because once something is seen clearly, consistently, without judgment, it can't stay carried unconsciously anymore. And what can't be carried unconsciously eventually gets left behind. So enter 2026 awake, alert, aware, not perfect, not healed, not transformed, just seeing. And trust that the seeing is enough, because it